Welcome to our home. Join Michael Voss and me, Jay Staker, to see how the book of Acts is continuing today. We'll share stories and leadership insights from across the globe and within the global network. We want you to see and hear the progress of leaders all over the world that believe in following the pattern of Acts, so that you too can participate with us. Well, welcome back, Michael. It's good to be back home, especially this time of year. You know, it's June. I know, as an old farmer talking to a young farmer, what time of year this is, and your farming is unique, not in the fact that your farm operation is really special, which I think it is, but it's unique because it's your tent making. And I want to have you talk about what that means as far as the pattern we see in Acts as a apostolic leader, you know, that you can tent make, but also that within the whole frame of your life work, how that tent making is so meaningful for you.
Yeah. So throughout my life, I've been farming in the spring and the fall seasons. And I've not known, you and I have had a lot of conversations about this, about it. Is it better to let go of that farming and that seasonal aspect of it and just focus in on what we're doing instead? Focus in as far as a time commitment, especially. It takes a lot of time to be involved in production agriculture.
Yes, it does. You know, my advice every time so far has been.
Yeah, I know. And that's partially why I'm doing it, is because as we reflect, you've helped me understand that it's my roots. I'm building on top of my grandparents, on my parents' shoulders. And I didn't get to choose where I was born and who I was born to, or the time frame I was born, or none of us get to choose that. And as we've reflected through the years, it's not a job. A lot of people think of terms of their job, and then they're going to get a job and move up the ladder and then be successful. That's what success is, and then retire. But it's when you see the patterns in Acts, you see Paul had a stewardship to complete. And he was sent out to complete that stewardship. And I've noticed and reflected through the years, it's that there's really a convergence of understanding that part of the work is to have a tent-making work that he can support financially. And also for me, it fits right into, I grew up on the farm. I loved doing it then. And I work with my father today and still enjoy growing crops today with him. So those are the shoulders I'm standing on. I'm growing out of those roots, and it's part of my life stewardship as well.
Well, that's the landscape that you've been established in. And I think of just the word that comes to my mind is harmony in your life work, because you've got your apostolic calling, you've got your agricultural, your farm calling.
Yeah.
And I think it's an incredible blessing for you because of the imagery we see between both those callings, you know, especially around Paul, talking about farming is such a great metaphor. But, and with us talking about rooting, you know, it's just, there's such a beautiful harmony there. But talk about, too, what it does for you in your soul by being able to go down to that farm.
Well, yeah, when you know that your daily activities are lined up with what God wants you to be doing, there's just an immense amount of joy that you can get from it and satisfaction. It doesn't take away all the struggle. It doesn't take away that this spring was full of rain.
Catastrophe.
And I really didn't know if it was worth this year's crop. And you have you still have all those same struggles that you would have, but you have a backstop. You have a foundational principles that you understand. This is where God has us. There's nothing more, nothing better for me to do than do with all my might what my hand finds itself doing. Ecclesiastes. and to enjoy my food, enjoy the drink, enjoy my wife with whom God gave us, and enjoy the work that God's put in front of us. And this is clearly the work of going out to the world, equipping them with the patterns of Acts, and being involved in production agriculture, and along with my family, along with my father and mother especially. It's a convergence in my life right now. I value this season of life. I'm at a productive age, a healthy age. My father's 75, productive, healthy. And so we're enjoying this season, even though this specific last 60 days, there's 30 of them have been really hard, really tough. But that's the season we're coming on.
I think only farmers understand the joy in that struggle.
The
struggle is real,
pain.
but it's that connection between what Paul describes as the work of ministry and your paid work, your tent making work. Yeah. And it also frees you up financially to make decisions, so you get so much out of it. And I'm also thinking of the generations to follow, that laying that foundation, that the Voss Farms. So far.
The value of, I'll tell you, the value of teaching your children to work hard, and not to be complacent, but to value people, to value things, to take care of, stewarding the land, stewarding things that God has given us, and being a caretaker. It goes all the way back to creation, that being a caretaker. And I think if there's a practicalness and a down to earth, no pun intended, that you have when you're out in the farm fields, and taking care of it is your responsibility. You get a real sense of that, and you get a real tie to the land, and the generational aspects of it. So it's a beautiful stewardship that I'm thankful to be taken care of. Yeah.
When there's a seasonal nature to it, and again, this is that harmony. There's
that
seasonal
helps.
Nature. It helps, but also I think it gives you a foundation to come from. You talked about your next generations within your family, but I think that foundation you get from your agricultural work translates into very real lessons that you can use to help people understand the work of ministry.
Yeah.
Just nobody maybe gets a better understanding of Ecclesiastes than a farmer.
Yeah, that's right. There's a season for every activity.
Yeah, that's right. That activity, leads us to the next thing to talk about today, and that's, I'm always fascinated, and you've been always gracious to bring me in on the journey of how you're learning to learn, and you're a voracious, lifelong learner, and you put in front of me about a month ago a book on a page, and we've just come through James, and James is a book that I was just clueless, never really understood it, didn't know how it fit in, and yet you took this system and put James on a page. So first, what led to the tool, and then what value do you see from the tool for both yourself and the network?
What led to the tool was we were going through the framework, the purpose of the book, and then the design of the book, the author's arguments within that book, and we were going into a lot of the details, which was good to try to sort them out and to try to master what James is actually saying. But I had a hard time week after week after week being in all those details and keeping track of the big picture. And so we knew that other people were having the same struggle. And so if you could put the entire framework of what James is saying on a single page and walk around with be equipped with that tool, and then walk around in your life with that framework in your head, you can actually get the wisdom that James is talking about.
Well, framework is so important, especially in the educational system that we operate in the U.S. I'm not sure how it resonates with the other countries around the world, is word detail. Learn the particulars. And we never really get to the framework, but our brain works just the opposite.
Yeah.
We have to have a framework, and then we adorn it with the details. And so I'm looking at this, and talk about, an example would be the idea of nature of the teachings, how they relate to me, and how that fits in within the framework.
Okay, so a good example is how James says you need to be slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen. And that's his purpose statement in the introduction there. He states the purpose two different ways, but it's the same purpose statement in the first chapter. And so a lot of people have taken that, and a lot of Christian traditions take that, and that means don't get mad. That means don't curse. And it means be a good listener. And so we kind of have these cliches, these simplistic statements now that cursing is wrong. And we have all sorts of sermons that are made about the rudders of ships and the tongue, about how they can, they can control the entire thing. But that's not precisely or the complexity that Paul is talking about, because Paul's saying those things in the context of you have to have wisdom. And where do you get wisdom? You get wisdom from, he says, the implanted word. And what is the implanted word? Well, the implanted word is the apostles' teachings that you're basing your whole life out of. And so you're asking for wisdom. He says in there to ask for wisdom. Ask the elders, pray for wisdom. But he's saying those things not as a mystical, like all of a sudden you're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to have wisdom.
That's right.
He's saying in the context of getting the implanted word in your habits, in your life. And in that sense, then you have wisdom. And so in our Christian traditions, we have made a lot of Pharisaical rules from the book of James, which are not what James is talking about. And so when you see this framework of all of what James is saying, the framework of what James is saying, you can see the principles he's talking about. You can see what wisdom that we're all supposed to be on that pathway of wisdom. And you can live out the principles that he's speaking of, rather than following rules of Christian tradition. So that's why the tool was made, and we equipped our network with that tool. And it was in the last 60 days, 30 days, been a great exercise for us.
Well, and for me, just a living example is the idea of wisdom. Pray for wisdom. Well, I did.
Yeah, and I didn't wake up.
Yeah.
I didn't wake up with it.
And so, of course, default, something wrong with me. I'm not praying right. Did I? And you can almost go to the ridiculous of what you'll do to try to figure that out. And once you understand the framework, that this is a book written to the diaspora churches, know how to live as community in tough times.
How to live as a family.
And it's like, ask for wisdom. I've already given it to you.
Yeah, but we're asking for personal wisdom.
Right.
But you ask for wisdom in the context of putting your life,
community,
in the principles of the community. Because the Jewish people are in a double bind there.
Yeah.
They're that's the book of James on a page. So many great aspects in there of the book, but the framework is what we all should master first. And
then having that framework keeps us in the frame, so we don't drift off.
That's right, in the patterns.
And staying in the pattern, staying in community, the implanted word. One of the things that's ongoing with us is our third generation. And you're investing a lot of time. Our leadership's investing a lot of time in establishing our third generation. And we just came off a wonderful session on networks, complex networks. And why is that so important for the network? As we're creating network in I think just of our example in Des Moines, our third generation is very small. And so that's going to have an impact on us. But third generation is so important for expansion and to make sure that we stay with complex networks, not complicated. Can you talk about those two things?
Yeah, so our third generation in our situation is if you're born 1990 to 2015.
I missed it.
You missed it by a few years. So did I. But you and I didn't get to choose those things. So it's our third generation, and we need to be equipping them. That's been a focus and that needs to be a focus of everyone, is always equipping that next generation. And part of the equipping is that they have to grow and to become men and women and be leaders. They have to be leaders. Mm-hmm. They can't just be recipients. And so they have to be on their own path of wisdom. We all need to be pursuing that wisdom, a lifelong pursuit. And a lot of people in this paradigm will understand church as a family. They will embrace that. They will see it clearly in the book of Acts. They will see it across the New Testament. Once they see it, they won't be able to unsee it. Church is a family, and church is their mothers and their fathers and their brothers, and they do life together. They live life together. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
It's anything but passive.
It's a very active process. And they'll begin to invest in one another. However, there are leaders who need to understand that those families need to multiply. Just as marriages have children that multiply themselves, you also have churches that should be multiplying themselves. That's how the gospel expands, is a multiplication of churches as families. But how do you hold those churches together? And that's what Paul was doing. Paul was building a network, and he was building a complex network. And so now to your second question, why is it called a complex network? Well, and you had mentioned complicated.
Yes.
And so this is what we were talking to our third generation about, is you need to have network skills, build network acumen. You need to be understanding what networking actually is. And it's not complicated. And what do we mean by that is a car, as a metaphor, a car is complicated. It has all these thousands of parts and pieces that you can ultimately take apart, lay out. And every bolt, every piece, you could lay out in a manual, in a parts manual. But it's complicated, but it's not complex, because to continue the metaphor, a roundabout where all these cars would drive is complex. And the reason is because a roundabout changes all the time. The cars that drive it are complicated. They don't change. They are, in essence, the same parts no matter where you bring them. Where a complex situation is, what if you go in the roundabout and you stop? What if you go in the roundabout and drive too fast? What if you get in the roundabout and there's 10 cars in there? What if you go in the roundabout and there's 100 cars in there? What if you go in the roundabout and you drive on the left side? What if going in the roundabout? So it's endless possibilities that can happen in a roundabout. What happens if you go straight through a roundabout instead of going around? So there's endless possibilities. And so just like a family in a social structure is dynamics change. If a person is there, a person is not there. If different. Right. And so in that way, we're trying to help people understand that in complex situations, you have to be undergirded by principles. You make decisions and leadership decisions based on principles, because the outcome is not it's not complicated. It's complex. It's not predictable.
Well, complex, it's very dynamic, as you said, and so you have to be able to operate within the understanding of, just like with James, you have to have the framework in your mind of that complex network. Otherwise, we'll start to build a framework of rules.
You build a framework of rules and you're going to build a denomination.
Right.
Denominations are complicated, but ultimately they're hierarchical, and you're building events, and you're building forms of entertainment. You're building services,
traditions,
and you're basing them on traditions. And so that's not what you see. You see a ever multiplying complex network, ever multiplying family of families around the world. And that's what the book of Acts started, and that's what we need to be continuing today. So that was our third gen.
We just transitioned us to around the world. They're very.
Oh.
I think he must have planned that.
Okay.
We're equipping our third generation. But at the same time, you're working in a large Asian country to equip
Okay, now I know where
their
you're headed.
generation.
Yeah.
Give me time, I'll get you there. But you're developing those apostolic leaders in real time for their first generation. And fortunately, God's opened the door and He has things in place. But what's the difference? But how are they responding to that establishment in a complex network?
Yeah, that is. So in this last month, we have worked with this large Asian country, and a lot of their different leaders, time after time, hours after hours of equipping. And it's all around this complex network and all around Paul's example and Paul's principles that he gives Paul had a skill in building complex networks that he developed, a network acumen, if you will. So when you read 2 Corinthians 16, when you read Romans 16, when you read the names in Colossians, the names in 2 Timothy, those aren't just a list of names that he's just, doing roll call. He's actually directing the network traffic. And so he's got teams that host local churches, but then they're part of the team that's moving around and sent out. And there's a complex environment of all these different players and all these different people that all have the same goals, and that is to establish and to multiply these churches as families. And so those principles, we spent a lot of time, because there's been some conflict between leaders. We're talking with some, they have 25,000 churches. Can you imagine the complexity that's in that? And you can't, if you make a denominational structure, the rules become very clear. So that leader, that set of leaders we're talking to, can make pretty clear decisions then. But if you're building a complex network, you're building a family, then you have to know the complex network principles that you find in the New Testament. And quite frankly, those are just not seen by a lot of Christian traditions. They hide in plain sight in the text. And so we spent a lot of time in the last 30 days talking about the passion that's needed, the intergenerationalness of the work, the network acumen, some of the core aspects. There's 4 component aspects of building complex networks that hold it together for unity and maturation. And you're dealing in a different language. We're dealing through an interpretation, and so you're spending 3-4 hours every other night on top of farming on Zoom. And so it's strenuous, but it's rewarding because they are getting these principles because they know what they don't want to build.
Well, if you think about that, 25,000 churches, all of a sudden you start to put in that complicated structure. So I now have a role that's a position.
Yeah.
And so I can just apply for this job.
We did.
Yeah. So
we dealt a lot with that in the last month, that people think they have a title and people think they have a role, but they have a title. It's what Western seminaries and Western job idea, the idea of a job, has put into us, as we think that we're supposed to get our education, then put our resume out, and then go get a job. And so even the pastoral role that we have in the Western church it's a job, and it's really upside down. And so getting these leaders that are leading, that was one network, was 25,000 churches. There are so many networks there that are multiplying, but they need that networking component in order to equip them for unity and maturation.
When it ties, we talked about third generation, they have to know their role to operate within that it isn't a situation where they just attend and they hire somebody to take care of those roles. They have to be equipped to do the work themselves.
Yeah.
And they have to be prepared to do that work. And then you put that in the context of, I have a job. Well, you have life work, and life work has different components of it. And I know this is the next topic for us, it was a great transition again, where you talk about jobs, is our generations following me, the world's rapidly changing and how we think about life work. And here, we're working on systems to equip our generations coming behind us to live in a world where it is very much in flux, but it also is a wonderful, our life development series, pushing back to the individual, their life development in the context of community. And we've got many points in that, but you last Sunday, in our teaching time for our leaders, talked about why it's so important to go through this process for life development, to get people prepared for their job work, their investment of what they're going to do for the rest of their life, and plan that out wisely in a fluid market where jobs, college, all those things are changing. What did you tell us that was so important in those times as far as shifting how we think about who we are and what we do?
Well, it's like what you said, boy, this is such a large topic, but it's...
especially with a 20-minute question there I just asked.
Well, life work. The first thing to get back to, I think, is to answer your question is, everyone has life work. Everyone has things to complete before they die. They have a life, and they are valuable, they're unique, and they're important to human society. We should, as Christians, as believers in the good news, we should all believe that about every person. And so our desire, our goal should be to get that, equip those people to help them understand that their life work. And we've lost that in the churches, and we've lost that in parts of our society. And so now we have this big macro idea that in order to be successful, you have to get let's just talk about college. In order to have you have to have a degree. And the degree then comes with, one of the bigger problems is the amount of cost that's associated with it. So you would be my age and older and still be riddled and handcuffed by a lot of debt. And so and furthermore, a lot of times when you go into the job market, then the job says to you, these are all the things you learned, but put all that on hold for a while we teach you the actual skills that you need for this particular job. And so there's a ever-growing mismatch that's happening. And so we need to get back to, especially as churches, what we're trying to do here and all around the world is help people be equipped, help leaders be equipped, that they can equip all their people to know what, especially their third generation, especially those that are 16 to 22 when they're making a lot of those life decisions, help them understand their life work, their individual life work, how they're wired, and where they were born, how their story impacts their life work.
Yeah, and let me say what we're not saying here. You're wired in a certain way, and so there's paid work, non-paid work that you can do that's going to really satisfy the way you were laid down in your mother's womb. Your giftedness, who you are, your wiring. It doesn't mean that there's only one job sitting out there.
No,
I have to be. I have to be a pastor. I have to be a missionary in India. No, you have to understand who you are and then be able to find those fields that are going to be satisfying to you, but also be equipped to be able to enjoy the work of your hands without stumbling through a process that's very expensive.
Yeah, there's 10, 20, 30, there could be 100 jobs that fit your actual life work. Life work is a larger, like you're explaining, a large concept that you have something to complete. We have people here that are really good at audio and visual things, and people that are
thank goodness.
Good, and thank goodness.
Make us look good.
And so you're wired. You have to understand how you're particularly wired, what gives you motivation, and jobs that you could get. We all should have paid work. We all should have work. But finding your place in the world and finding meaning and purpose in this world is difficult. And a lot of people go into a tremendous amount of debt not having an idea of their life work first. And unfortunately, it really handcuffs you for a long period of time as you try to pay that back.
Yeah, it can really impact your decisions.
It really affects your decisions. And so you really need to be able to, we're trying to equip the churches and the leaders in the churches around the world to be able to, and you've been leading our Apprenticeship Academy here locally, and on-the-job training, skill development, life work development, and then understanding how to think, some of the liberal arts of thinking, knowing the history of the world and civilizations, and being able to think wisely.
Integrated thinker, as you would say.
So, an integrated thinker.
Well, and in that process, I think it's so important learning what you're equipped to do by doing it in the context of all this learning, but also starting the process with a life plan, a plan of what's my purpose and how am I going to accomplish that purpose? What legacy am I going to leave behind? So that on the front end of this whole process is really working hard to lay the foundation so you know that wiring. So when you go out, and example we had in our conversation Sunday morning was a young lady in her 70s, student taught, and found out that she was terrible at it at the end of her college career, as opposed to finding out who she was before she started. And she felt she got value out of it, but it wasn't the job that she could actually thrive in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we as churches need to help educate our families in this matter, and so that's why we've done this locally and why we're doing it globally. And you're an educator. You've been in
all different levels.
Yeah, high school, collegiate. So it's a very important season in our culture, in our world. Education is changing in the way a lot of people, Generation Z is looking at college and saying, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go into $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year for 4 years. And so there's a lot of, the church needs to be in this game, because the church has answers for wisdom. The church has answers for life work that are all they're all rooted in the gospel.
And one of the challenges you face, and I know you put a huge investment over the last years on understanding how to recognize people for their training, what they're equipped to be, certificates, degrees, all the things, and that's been part of it. How does that influence the whole process for design?
Well, what you're talking about is recognition. You go to college, for a piece of paper. And what's that piece of paper? It has some form of recognition. And why is it? Because everyone else in the world recognizes it. That piece of paper has recognition because we all value credentials. We live in a credentialed society. So if we have our master's, we have our doctorate, then that's more valuable than a bachelor's, for example. If we have our bachelor's versus our high school, that's more valuable. And that's what we tell ourselves as culturally. And while that's not necessarily actually true, it is what we inherently teach each other. So credentials, assessment, all those things need to be a piece of the global framework. Global Apprenticeship Academy is what we call it. And a piece of that framework is recognition. So degrees of bachelor's, master's, and doctorate are still available and still there. Assessments there, competency, becoming competent, becoming a master craftsman, all that is in there. But your goal is to grow in wisdom. Your ultimate goal is to grow in wisdom. And you need to master the scriptures and you need to master the culture. And so everything else is a subset to that. The degree, you can get the degree as you accumulate work and submit it for assessment. But you don't need to start on a pathway that, I'm going to get a degree. that's not inherently where you need to start. You need to start in a way that you're going to gain wisdom, because you know that's with the biblical instruction.
Well, you've shifted it to, it's the learner, the individual that's driving the process, and they identify what they need. So if they need a degree, they get a degree.
Yeah.
And what's going to be the most helpful way to do that versus, I think of the Pauline model of, he would train his next generation leaders and they'd commend them with a letter of recommendation. All these things hang around, but they've lost their value. A letter of recommendation doesn't mean anything because you can't say anything negative now.
Yeah.
But if I get a letter from Michael Voss that says, this person is skillful, I know who you are, so I know who they are.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, we're trying to get at, the credentialing of me based on who I am and what I can do.
Yeah, we've simplified that to references on a resume now. But yeah, this is an area that it's, what do we want to say about it? It is, I think it's revolutionary. We got to get back to on-the-job training. We got to get back to skill development. We got to get back to liberal arts, a wisdom base and a view. And but starting with our 16 to 22, 24-year-olds is critical. If I could say it, we need to help them understand their life work.
Because we're at a point in time where maybe it was just, coincidence, but I think it's more by design that your stewardship fell just at a time where this was all in upheaval. And so you get to look at all the disparate parts that are falling into disarray and assemble them back into, the theme, back into the apostolic way. Yeah. We had a pattern laid down, and it works, a wisdom tradition that we can follow. And then you put one of your books on a page in front of me.
Oh, yeah.
On generations. And as you were just talking about, that book on the page, generations, that's, the time again is just, it's elegant to see how it unfolds. But you talk about getting back to your roots and how that influences your whole emphasis, this book and what you're learning from that, your vision for generational follow-on.
Yeah, so this last portion, Jay, you're right. There's 3 things that have happened in the last month that have continued further up and further in the paradigm, further up and further in. And one of those is Jean Twenge has a book called Generations. And she talks about there's 6 generations currently living in the world, in the United States. And so as I read through that book, I thought, my goodness, this is full of so much information, great information, statistics, and but man, I'm having a hard time keeping track of it. Mm-hmm. And so again, putting that entire book on a page, and so you can see that there's the silence. They were born 1925 to 1940. They were loud and active. Their name is a misnomer. Then you have the boomers, the 46. You're a boomer through 1964. And they peaked with 3.8 children per woman. That's why they're called boomers, because that was the highest statistics of children, was the boomers. And then you have Generation X, was 65 to 79, and that's me. And Generation X, they didn't know where to place us. They're really hard to define. Then you have the millennials, 1980 to 1994. Then you have Generation Z, which is 95 to 212. And then you have the polars, which is 2013 to 2029. And they're called the polars because there's so much polarization in politics, in a lot of communication about global warming. And so the polar ice caps are melting. And so they're called, for right or wrong reasons, they're called the polars. So you go through and you can see how there's 5 to 15 attributes that define each generation. And a lot of people will say, well, why do you need to know these things? Why does it matter? And you can clearly see from her writing is all of us are influenced. by every other generation, and we're definitely influenced by the generation we grew up in. And so whether we have all those attributes individually or not is a different matter altogether. But understanding the general contours of each generation is extremely helpful, because we're casting off a lot of the roots in the Generation Z, and the Polars are casting off a lot of their roots. That's very much an attribute of those two generations, where the previous four really were big on holding on to it. And so you get a lot of insights into that. So that's one aspect in the last month. We had two others. What was the other two?
Well, I'm just, as you say that, as a boomer, we've become a cultural joke because of our self-focus and being self-absorbed, and people make fun of us because it's all about us. Because we grew up in a generation where there was prosperity, and we had freedom and time and currency to invest in ourselves, as opposed to the silence that came before us that was just trying to survive and build a life and build a family. They had a different perspective. So it is so important to understand that. And yet, the processes that come with that, I'm thinking just with Jeff finishing up the Petrine Circle.
Yeah.
Just think corpus linguistics, that whole idea of corpus linguistics, or I won't even try it.
Syntagmatic.
That's the word, linguistics.
Yeah.
How's that tie into generations and what you're learning in this book?
Oh my, yeah. So in the last 30 days, we've been doing a fair amount of work on corpus linguistics versus syntagmatic linguistics. Syntagmatic is syntax. And why that's important for us is a lot of things are translated from language to language by the syntax, by the structure of the sentence and the words themselves. And the problem with the core, and that goes on in Bible translation, that goes on in textbooks, that goes on in, but there's other countries in the world that are doing a fair amount of, this is where I heard it from, was from that large Asian country, was they're talking about more, and there's a lot, once you start looking at this, you can begin to see a lot of different aspects of this, that it's been around for a while. But corpus linguistics, and that is the understanding the framework of something first, understanding the whole corpus.
The body.
The whole body of it, and its general outline, and then beginning your translation process. Versus if you start with the syntagmatic, with the syntax, and that is you begin to, the metaphor would be is you start with the leaves on the trees, would be syntagmatic or syntax. Versus if you're doing corpus linguistics, you're looking at the whole forest, understanding the contours of the forest, the different types of trees in different general areas based on the different elevations, different soil types. That's corpus linguistics.
And that's the generational tie-in here. Understanding the generations is really corpus linguistics. You're understanding the whole body.
Exactly. And so we've been doing work on corpus versus syntagmatic linguistics. It has far-reaching effects for Bible translation, has far-reaching effects for communication with other cultures, and has far-reaching for the generations as well. We're doing, the way you interpret the information that's in front of you is through understanding the whole framework.
And so if you pull on any string in your life, as we discussed it from the beginning to the end, you pull on any string, you're going to see such integration of all the parts that move when you pull on that one string. Because it's all tied together, because it's a design. It is laid down as a design. And thinking about where we started, the farming, your roots. Let's end this morning on the idea of, roots. You had a quote you wanted to share about, don't lose touch with your roots.
Yeah.
How does that close us out today with this conversation?
Yeah, you're so right about the It all goes back to the gospel. Everything's connected. It all goes back that there is good news. There is good news. And we have to be part of fulfilling that good news, part of equipping people with that good news on this side. It's going to be great on the other side. Mm-hmm. All things will be made perfect. Be a new heaven and a new earth. But until then, the work that we've been given to do, the culture we've been put in, the roles that we've been given in this complex world and the complex networks that we should be building more families. So the quote comes from a guy by the name of Thomas Oden, and this was in one of the quotes that was in our 2 Timothy book that we were doing with a large Asian country. Mm-hmm. And here's what it says. And this is a comment on 2 Timothy 1 through 18, I believe. This is a commentary based on those 18 verses, the introduction. In both his comments on Judaism and Timothy's maternal guidance, he talks about his grandmother and his mother, Paul was making a single point. Do not, Timothy, and all of us, do not lose touch with your roots. You stand grounded in a family and a multi-generational traditions. We're not here on our own. Sure, we make some decisions, but most of all, but more than our individual decisions in our life, a lot of things are chosen for us. The big things in life are actually chosen for us. Where we're born, who we're born to. So we get to make the best of what we've been given. Do not spend that inheritance. It's an inheritance. Do not spend that inheritance unwisely. Today, we are saturated with romanticisms about progress, about ideologies of change, and the pretense that all change is positive and that no change could actually be regressive. That illusion has deluded us into deliberately throwing away hard-won social structures and historical achievements and wise memories that could otherwise been extremely valuable to us. When you look at that generations, you look at the silence and silence of people and the boomers you look at all the hard-fought things. That's what he's talking about. Is they didn't do everything, but there are aspects that we still want in our societies and in our. It's not a black and white where everything is bad or everything is good. There's complexity in it, and we have to
beat me to it.
And we have to be able to wisely sort through it. We can't just say, we can't just throw it at all. So that illusion has deluded us in deliberately throwing away hard-won social structures and historical achievements, wide memories that otherwise would have been extremely valuable to us, and we just lay them aside. An important aspect of contemporary discipling consists simply in the recollection, the recollection, the imaginative remembering, and the reappropriation of the apostolic teaching. And so he's telling us that we have to go back all the way to the apostolic teachings of the apostles. That's what he's saying. And in those principles, that framework, he's saying we have to, that's where our roots lie. And we can't forget those roots. And we build on top of every generation, and we take the wisdom that's given. But it's all based on the teachings from the New Testament, ultimately.
Well, this morning, your roots, you had your roots on the farm with your grandparents, your parents, but you also went back to the roots of Solomon. His teaching in Ecclesiastes, what he'd learned about life. That's your inheritance. That's your tradition that you can hold on to. And what we're called to do is to go further up and further in to understand what's been passed to us and the privilege we have of being in that. And it's like, what a delightful life to be able to live in the kingdom now, knowing that we're living in the church as it was meant to be by staying faithful to the traditions laid down by the apostles.
Yeah.
And what a better way, no better way to end a conversation of further up and further in and understanding our roots and staying true to what we were given, the word that was imparted.
Yeah.
So, thank you, Michael.
Yep. Thank you, Jay. It's good to be together again.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.